Have you ever walked into a room and maybe it's a new job that you got, or maybe a really cool opportunity, and you're in this shiny new office and suddenly panic sets in? And it's because you think about, maybe I don't deserve to be here. And instead of celebrating this huge accomplishment, you look around and you think at any moment, someone's going to figure it out and they're going to call you out on it, and you're going to feel like a huge fraud. Immediately, the fraud police is going to come and take you to fraud jail or whatever. That feeling, my friends, is the very complicated beast that is imposter syndrome. And in this episode, I'm going to break down why so many of us experience this phenomenon. And I'll also share how to tell the difference between feeling like a fraud and if you're actually unqualified. And make sure you stick around for the whole episode, because I talked to several experts about this, including a psychologist, and I learned a lot about imposter syndrome and what you can do to break free from that prison that is your mind that I'll share with you. Hey there, I'm Melody Bose, your host of Jeans with a Blazer, a podcast about rewriting the rules of work and life. Welcome to the first episode of Jeans with a Blazer. And how appropriate that this first episode is on imposter syndrome. First of all, who do I think I am to have a podcast? What could I possibly say that hasn't already been said a million times before? Maybe you're here because I begged you on social media, or maybe you're here because I bribed you with a giveaway for a free iPad. How embarrassing for my soul. Okay, so all of that was imposter syndrome talking. So imposter syndrome is that crippling fear of self-doubt in your own achievements, despite a proven track record of your success. And according to, let me read this so I get this right. According to research from the Survey Center on American Life at the American Enterprise Institute, yes, that is a real thing, 1 in 3 workers experience these feelings related to imposter syndrome. Although I do suspect that it's a lot more than 1 in 3, because if we think about it, maybe those other 2/3 are scared to admit that they have imposter syndrome, and their imposter syndrome is questioning their imposter syndrome. So it's like imposter syndromeception. But okay, 1 in 3, sure. So all of the thoughts that I shared with you earlier about my own self-doubts with this podcast are thoughts that I have had and currently have. But you know what? I decided that I'm not going to let that stop me because, well, 1, I wouldn't have a podcast episode. And 2, more importantly, because these feelings of I'm not good enough or I don't deserve this, I believe that shouldn't stop anyone from creating something that they believe in. Guys, we have such a short time on this planet, and each of us have our own unique challenges that we overcome. And it ranges from so many things, from limited access to higher education, socioeconomic background, race, gender, sexual orientation. There are so many things that we already have in our way that just to even have the opportunity to try is a huge win, and a major privilege already. So to let something like self-doubt make you quit while you're ahead, or worse, quit before you even get started? No. The gifts you have are way, way too important to share with the world and the people around you, and we're not going to let that happen. So I'm not even trying to be self-righteous and say that all this stuff I have to say on this podcast is a gift to you. No, I'm actually going to get meta for a sec, because if you're listening to me or if you're watching on YouTube, first of all, your time is a gift to me. So thank you. I don't care if I sound like a cheese ball. But second, I'm going to be super transparent here, because that's what this podcast is about, the messy journey. But I actually recorded this episode twice because, real talk, I watched it back the first time and I was so nervous. My chin was shaking like a raccoon trapped in a snack drawer. I said, guys, like, we got to do this over. We can't put this out. And guess what? I'm sure I'm going to look at this and I'm going to judge myself super hard. And honestly, that's another entire episode right there. But in my mind, if you don't take a single thing away from this podcast, and if you never listen to another episode again, If I can share one thing with you that makes you feel less alone or offers a thoughtful perspective, or even if you laugh at me at how cringy I sound, I don't care. If I've added anything to your day, in my book, I've made it. So if you have the chance to create something new, apply for that job, that promotion, write that book, paint that painting, pick up a camera and start photography, do not stand in your own way, because there will be a million people in line waiting to tear you down. So don't be your own worst enemy. Easier said than done, but we're going to get into it. Okay, so now that we know that you are an unstoppable force of nature, why should you spend your very precious time listening to me talk about imposter syndrome? Well, I have some solutions and insights that I learned from chatting with a psychologist, and it was for an article that I wrote about imposter syndrome. But I'm kicking things off with a extremely embarrassing story about a career fail, a professional fail that I had. And guys, it's messy. I'll keep it short because we got a lot of stuff to go into, but at the worst, you'll feel better about yourself that this didn't happen to you. And at best, you'll learn a cautionary tale about how one young woman refused to let a setback keep her down, blah, blah, blah. And by setback, I was on Delulu Island. I'm sharing my trauma, so just pull up a chair. Let's get into it. Okay, so early in my career, I was working in a corporate office. It was my first grown-up big girl job after college. It had floor-to-ceiling windows. I had a swipe badge. I thought, this is it. I've made it. Give me a year. I'm going to be CEO running this place. Oh, Miss Girl. Oh, Miss Girl. The reality of the corporate world hit me hard. And I loved the people that I worked with, and I genuinely enjoyed what I did. I was a writer in a marketing department, but I was learning the rules of working in a corporate environment, and I was at the very bottom rung of the corporate ladder. I didn't understand why I had to be chained to my desk for 8 hours a day. I didn't understand why we had meetings, about having meetings that could have been an email. And the first time I replied all to an email that was not supposed to be replied all to, anxiety. And that's not even the fail that I'm going to get to. It gets way worse. All right, so after a couple years of being there, I wanted to see what else was out there. So I started applying, and I ended up leaving my very secure job because I got an offer for more money. And at the time, more money and expanding my skill set was my primary motivator. And I learned that this new job was not as exciting as I thought it would be. First, very humbling life lesson. The grass isn't always greener. So in the meantime, after existential crisis, I studied on how to improve my resume. I applied for other jobs. I did a ton of interviews, and I was rejected over and over and over. But with that rejection came something really powerful. I learned how to interview, and I learned how to sell myself really, really well, which is interviewing should be taught in schools if it's not already. Eventually I did get an offer, and I took a job where I somehow convinced the people that interviewed me that I could run their company's marketing department. Okay, I was like 2 years in at this point. If that's any allusion to where this goes, just buckle up. So this wasn't a huge company. It had like maybe 80 people in it, but it was growing fast. They were in the engineering space. So they didn't actually have a marketing department when I got hired, but I had a very fancy title. I had my own office. It was big goals. And I had a direct report. It was an intern, and she was so smart. But I'll take a direct report. Doesn't matter. Guys, I was so horribly bad at this job. I was so horribly underqualified. And I knew it because I was terrified each day with all of these responsibilities. I had a budget. I had never had a budget before. I was 25. I could barely budget my own life. I had no idea what to do. I would be Googling what is lifetime customer value, which is like marketing 101, just trying to figure it out as I went along. So I was really bad at it. And the nail in the coffin was I lost a ton of important emails for these sales leads because I I deleted the document that had all of them. Cool. Proficient in Microsoft Word. Is she really? We don't know. And then it happened. My literal worst career nightmare. I was the marketing department, so I reported directly to the CEO. They figured out that I'm probably not the best fit for this job, rightfully so. So yeah, the owner of the company, who was part of the decision to hire me, who thought I had such great promise, like, I don't even think I was in 90 days. Anyway, I was promptly let go. And just like in the movies, I had my my box of belongings that I had to pack in my office, my sad little plant just like hanging out the side. Like I was fighting back tears. It was so dramatic. It was probably more dramatic in my head, but I was like, this is awful. So dignity, gone. Confidence, non-existent. Ego, humbled. And I thought, this is it. I'm not good enough. The people who are way more successful than me figured out that I'm not good enough. I'm never going to get another job. If I don't die of humiliation first, then I'm probably going to be homeless. But guess what? All these things were stories that I was telling myself. And yes, rooted in actual genuine fear. But those things, could only happen if I really truly allowed myself to give up and accept defeat. So what I did is I spent the next month applying to jobs, fixing up my resume. I had like 15 different versions of my resume, applying to more jobs, literally 20 to 30 jobs a day. I would post up in Starbucks. I was that girl that would order like a coffee. I respect the barista. So I got more than one coffee, but I would literally just post up there, apply to jobs all day. I could share a whole more embarrassing stories about that, but eventually, I landed another job that I was so awesome, and it was aligned with my experience level, my salary expectations, and it just kind of kicked my career and honestly my life in a new direction. So that would not have happened if I had not failed so horrifically bad. Okay, but one thing I want to be super clear is this whole ordeal that I just shared, this was not imposter syndrome. No, and I know that sounds contradictory, but remember, if we go back to the original definition of what imposter syndrome is, it's when you doubt yourself despite your competency and proven track record of ability. So it's when you're capable, it's when you're skilled and experienced, yet you still feel like a fraud. But in my case, I wasn't suffering from self-doubt in the face of success. No, I was genuinely lacking experience and qualifications, and I was humbled because of it. That's not imposter syndrome. That is being new to something and learning the hard way. There's a difference. So, how do you know the difference between if you're suffering from actual imposter syndrome or if you're genuinely in over your head and you can't do it? I'll tell you. So, at the time of this episode being published, there is currently a labor shortage in the US, and that can work in your favor because employers are having to get a little creative with what they're expecting. And the days of having a perfect resume that aligns with, I don't even know if that was ever the truth, but you don't need to have a perfect resume that fits the job description just identically. If you can look at a job description and feel like you qualify for 80% of it, you're ready. You don't need to be 100%. Maybe you need to learn a few more skills, or maybe you've been working kind of in a similar role and you just haven't gotten that shot yet. Can you look at the technical programs that are listed in the job listing and maybe even feel moderately proficient in, I would say 70% of those. Cool. It might mention other things like soft skills that are required, like communication and critical thinking, which are all things that you can develop yourself. And one of the ways is to listen to this podcast. So, got you there. So if you've been on a track in your career and you've studied for it, you've had opportunities that have set you up for it, if your track record shows that even if you're not 100% ready, maybe you're 80% ready for this job, and that's good enough. You can learn those handful of skills. You can learn stuff on the job. So in my case, I was more like 20% there. I was ready for the opportunity, but I wasn't prepared for it. And it ended up working out for me because I refused to give up. I'm like a cockroach. Can't keep me down. But let's move on. Why we experience imposter syndrome. So I mentioned that I wrote an article about imposter syndrome, and I'll link to it in this episode's description. But in order for me to understand it better, I had to talk to a few pros and get some quotes for the article. I spoke to a few people, but one particular was a psychologist, and she said something very interesting. She mentioned imposter syndrome is more of a chronic experience that flares up periodically versus something that we can trace back to a specific instance or event. And that same psychologist also suggested that when you doubt yourself, it may be because you are pushing your own boundaries, and it's actually a sign that you are learning and growing. So what that tells me is you're taking on new responsibility. There's a new opportunity. There's a lot of change happening. Our brains don't like change, okay? Our brains like patterns because patterns are familiar. It's consistent. Patterns are safe. We naturally fight change because it's hard. So that growth mindset is a side effect of imposter syndrome. Let's dig deeper. What causes it? Turns out it could be a number of things, personality traits, for example. Like if you grew up with a perfectionist mindset, it could also stem from things like anxiety or low self-esteem. It could also stem from your environment, such as your family or your caregivers. If they pushed you as a child to be a high achiever, you could have imposter syndrome because you develop these unrealistic expectations for yourself, and that's not even your fault. To make things even more complicated, there are multiple types of imposter syndrome, okay? There's not just one. It's layered in 5 different types. We have the perfectionist, the superhuman, the expert, the soloist, and the natural genius. So I wanted to keep this episode as short and sweet as possible, but I did want to give more information about it if you so choose. I put together a free guide on all of these, going in depth on what each of the types are, how to know which one you might identify with. And if you want to check it out, I'll make sure it's in the details of this episode for you. So, next, I want to get into something that I'm going to do in every episode. It's called the jargon jar. So in each episode, I'm going to roast common or corporate jargon that is so overused and meaningless and uncreative and just needs to stop. So in this episode, fake it till you make it. All right, so I know that's not your traditional corporate jargon, but relevant to this week's topic. Fake it till you make it implies that you convince yourself and those around you that you are successful so that you'll eventually get there and it will become a reality. Love that for you. And the concept isn't really what bothers me because sometimes we have to figure things out as we go and we don't necessarily have all the answers, and that's okay. We get scrappy. I talked about being 80% there. And while I believe a confident mindset can give us that push in the right direction to take risks, it shouldn't replace developing your actual skills and doing the work. I believe that authenticity goes a much longer way. Be honest about what you don't know. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You're not faking anything. You're learning, you're growing, you're showing up. So I want to reframe that. Maybe this will be the next cringy thing that I'll revisit in like a month or so, but face it till you make it. Because I got this from ChatGPT. Because confidence isn't pretending, it's building proof. All right, so if you've heard a piece of jargon lately that you cannot stand and you want to share it, send it to me, DM me on social media at jeanswithablazer on Instagram, or send an email to hello@jeanswithablazer.com, and I might get featured in an upcoming episode. All right, so let's get back to it. How do we get over imposter syndrome? So I mentioned before I asked a few experts to weigh in with some strategies they use and recommended to help deal with it. And we know that ultimately imposter syndrome is just a stressor. And to get where we're going, let's travel back in time a little bit. Back in the caveman days, we had to worry about things like saber-toothed tigers coming in and eating our resources and families. So the feelings associated with imposter syndrome I equate to paper tigers because the idea of them is often scarier than the reality, and paper tigers can't hurt us. So here are some tips to help overcome imposter syndrome. Number 1, get to know your craft. So you want to prepare for what you have going on and in front of you the best you can. You want to do whatever it takes to set yourself up for success And whether that means reading a book or reaching out to connect with a mentor that can help you, take a class, watch a YouTube video, there's so many resources out there that are free that you can learn and grow from. There's really no excuse why you shouldn't be an expert in what you want to do and what you want to go for. So show up the best you can. For example, if you're an accountant and you wake up one day and you decide you want to be a creative director and manage a team of designers at a ad agency, cool, do that. But also maybe learn Photoshop first. That might be a good step in the right direction. Okay, number 2, keep those receipts. And what I mean by that is you should keep a folder or maybe in your notes app so you can write down all your tangible wins that remind you of the facts behind your achievements, degrees you've got, awards you've received. When you experience self-doubt, you can take a peek at these notes just to remind yourself what you've done. Just so you can validate yourself that yes, you are deserving of this success. So I've actually had a yay me folder in my email where I would put all of the acknowledgements from colleagues who told me I did a good job on a project or just thanked me for my help. And it was just kind of nice to have. And then separately, I believe you get back what you put out into the world. So do yourself a favor and after this episode, send an email or a text or a voice note to someone you care about, a colleague, a friend, and just like tell them that they're doing great at whatever it is they're doing if they've made a big impact on you. Because one, it's a nice thing to do. But two, that person who is reading or listening back to that can turn their whole day around. So it's, spread the love. Number 3, lean on colleagues. Lean on colleagues or somebody you trust who has achieved more than you. It could be someone in a higher position above you or even just a really accomplished friend that you respect. They can share some insights of their own from their perspective, and that could really help validate your concerns and share perspective that brings you back to reality where, yes, you can do this, and yes, you do deserve this. Next, remind yourself of the bigger picture. Okay, so earlier I shared my own thoughts of self-doubt that I struggled with just around publishing this podcast, but I took myself out of that equation, and I believe that creating this and sharing my experiences and embarrassing stories just to connect with you as the audience, even if 4 people tune into this and one of them is my mom, it doesn't matter. I can be delulu enough to believe that my intention and my message is bigger than my fear, and that's my truth. And I hope it is yours too. So I genuinely hope you take that spark that you have in you and you run with it, because you never know what you can accomplish if you just show up and give it a shot. So cheers to you. And that's it for this week's episode. Next time on Jeans with a Blazer. So life is full of setbacks, and our careers are no exception. I have had my fair share of failures and falling flat on my face. But the thing about that is being able to pick yourself up after you fall is a super powerful skill. So in this episode, by the end of it, you'll have a literal blueprint for how to bounce back, adapt, and just rebuild stronger after you've had a setback or a failure and you're not feeling great about it. I'll also give you some tips for working through and processing all of that. So, let's get into it. That's a wrap on this episode of Jeans with a Blazer. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, a mindset shift, or just the push you needed, do me a favor. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Leave a review wherever you enjoy your podcasts. It helps more people find it, and it keeps these conversations going. And I love hearing from you. Follow at Jeans with a Blazer and tag me with your biggest takeaways, your latest wins, or just tell me what topics you want to hear about next. See you next time.